Welcome to another episode of One Show, One Drink, part of the What We Watch When We Drink podcast from the Booze Dancing Entertainment Network and the Cryptocurrency Podcast of Record. And we are going to talk whiskey, and we are going into the archives of motion pictures.
All right, shall I roll the intro?
Roll the intro.
Welcome to One Show, One Drink, part of the What We Watch When We Drink podcast from the Booze Dancing Entertainment Network, where we take one show or film and pair it with one boozy beverage. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Audible, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can also find us on boozedancing.com, and if you have any questions, comments, show or drink suggestions, email us at boozedancing@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
We are back with One Show, One Drink, and we've got a very fun, short little episode tonight with fascinating whiskey and a more fascinating movie. We are going to be looking at the Marx Brothers classic comedy, Duck Soup, from 1933, when Mike was born.
That's not fair.
Why you oughta?
It's not wrong, but it's not fair.
Before we get into the wackiness of the Marx Brothers, let's have a little whiskey.
Oh, we're going to talk about the wackiness of Compass Box?
The wackiness of Compass Box. And actually, you know what? The Compass Box actually works really well with Marx Brothers, don't they? Because John Glazer is a madman, a mad scientist of whiskey.
An iconoclast as well.
He's an iconoclast. He puts things together that you would not think should be put together. He blends them all together in a magical recipe, like the Marx Brothers do in their comedies with all these different characters. And it all goes into some big batch, and boom, you got this magical thing that comes out at the other end.
In this case, it's called a marrying cask.
This bottle from the Glasgow blend was selected by Southern California Whiskey Club, and it was bottled in 2021, and the two casks were married in 2020. 234 bottles. It's 49% ABV, and the cask was a Lowland grain whiskey barrel. So there you go. There's the back of the baseball card for you.
Shall we do a little cheers?
We should.
Gentlemen.
Ka-ching,
Cheers.
ka-ching.
There you go. There you go.
We like Compass Box.
We do.
I don't think I've ever had a private bottling.
We've had a couple interesting ones over the years. There was one that our dear friend Dawn Davies, which apparently, by the way, as I've recently learned, and I confirmed it with her, it's spelled Davies. It's pronounced Davis.
What?
Yes.
With no E?
Yes.
Lies.
Right.
E
But
is silent.
she goes with the Davies. So she's like, all right, she was tired of it. She rolls with it. So
The E is silent.
So anyway.
Wow, we've learned a lot already.
So she worked with Compass Box on a bottling of the Entertainer for Selfridges when she was working their wine and spirits or whatever it was at Selfridges. And we also tried a bottle that was made especially for Burns Steakhouse in Tampa. So we've had a couple of these little one-offs that they've done. Always good. Always good.
I did not realize that they did the one-offs. I did not know that. So
I didn't really think of it till you just mentioned it. Then it's like, oh yeah, we have had a couple of them. So
yeah, and we had their brand ambassador on with us on a Zoom pandemic tasting with our club, and that's when this topic came up. And I didn't even know that was part of their offerings. They do the private casks.
You said it was a Zoom pandemic tasting. So you were tasting the pandemic during Zoom, or was it a Zoom tasting during the pandemic?
No. We were tasting the pandemic. We had 6 different kind of viruses.
Herd immunity. Going for the herd immunity in a group. That's nice.
Did you have Omicron, or this was pre-Omicron?
We had COVID-19, COVID-18, we had SARS, we had bird flu. We had them all. We didn't know. They were all blind. It was blind tasting.
Was there a particular vintage of the COVID you found the best? Was like the 12 better than the 19? Was there the bouquet?
The 18 was very popular.
You know what I'm wondering? The original Spanish flu from 1920 or 1919, whatever it was.
We didn't get that one.
But I'm guessing somebody's got it in their cellar somewhere,
Under the house.
Behind like the big wooden curio, and it's buried in the back with all the will and all the papers from the Civil War, and it's sitting back there waiting to be exposed.
Yeah, that was a smallpox, wasn't it?
It'll be on Sotheby's one day. You can
Nice.
probably it'll be
Yeah,
nice
right
auction.
now it's deep in the CDC archives.
That's right. Yes. Wow.
Real deep.
That'll be, yeah. Those virus tastings are the best, really.
The Zoom pandemic tasting. Gotta love it.
So I don't know the recipe for this. As you know, as we all know, the transparency is Lord King with Compass Box, and they will tell you down to the nth degree what the makeup of one of their bottlings is. I don't know what this one is, so can't tell you. But there's always Kalila, isn't there?
Well, no, not with these guys. I don't think he's a big. What is it, Klein Leash?
Oh, there's a lot of Klein Leash and stuff. Yeah, it's Klein Leash, a lot of things.
He's a big Klein Leash guy, apparently.
It is awfully good, though. I went in.
It smells fantastic. And there's a lot of baking spices and all that good stuff. I assume this is some sherry. Like the original, the regular Glasgow blend, I'll read a little bit about it. Like Artist Blend, Glasgow blend boasts a high single malt content, inclusion of malt whiskey matured in Oloroso sherry seasoned butts, and an Isla single malt of a powerfully peaty nature has made this a blended Scotch whiskey like no other.
So I can only tell you what is on the back of this label, and it does say it is aged in Oloroso sherry seasoned cask, full of fruitcake and spice-like character. So I would guess it's probably the quote-unquote standard Glasgow blend that's put into a grain cask.
I do get a little bit of the smoke coming out. More like a tobacco.
And I would guess it's Kalila.
But it's not peaty like heavy peaty like an Ardbeg. It's more of a tobacco-y, that kind of thing.
And I got like a little black pepper and a little like pears on the nose too, which is weird because I don't know why I'd get that.
Like a baked pear, like a
poached
pear with some cloves in there, maybe a little lemon.
That's funny you said that. I was going to say citrus. I wasn't thinking lemon necessarily, but there's definitely some citrus.
That's just nice.
I'm getting more like an orange peel, like a candied orange peel.
You and your filthy Isla. I was all happy with my Heather.
It's delicious.
It really is.
That is very nice. And it's got a punch. It's got a little bit of punch.
Well, 49%. It's got a little kick to it. We're talking
for 49%. It is easy drinking. It is easy drinking. That's
and there's a lot of tobacco on the back end. Like there's a little bit of like a rich smokiness to it.
The finish is a bit long. It's just kind of waffling around in my gullet. It's good.
That is very nice.
Well, speaking of gullets, I'm not sure where that was going, but we are going to talk tonight about a movie that is near and dear to my heart, and a cast of characters who are near and dear to my heart: the Marx Brothers, and their 1933 classic, Duck Soup. Now, had you boys seen Duck Soup before we watched it?
I've probably seen it in pieces over the years, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched it from start to finish.
Probably years and years ago, there was probably some sort of Marx Brothers marathon that this, Horse Feathers, Day at the Races, they were all probably run back to back to back because they're not terribly long movies. So you could put them all in an afternoon.
What's the one? Isn't there one on the ship?
That is, I believe that's Night at the Opera.
Is it? Okay.
I'm a Marx Brothers fan from when I was a young boy. I remember watching one of the movies at my grandparents' house on the big wooden piece of furniture television console. And I remember just being blown away that this was, what the hell is this? It's just, granted, a lot of TV was black and white then, but it was, what the hell is going on? This is crazy. And I was just sucked in and I couldn't get enough. And of course you just couldn't, freely on demand find a Marx Brothers movie. You just wait for another one to come on. And then I found Groucho's game show.
You Bet Your Life.
And I got sucked into Groucho's world, and boy, been just a part of me forever. So Duck Soup is a crazy, crazy film. Arguably, it's just a disjointed thing that's kind of a bunch of different ragtag skits thrown together with musical interventions.
The musical interludes just cracked me up. I just remember the first one where who's the woman? Who's the Margaret Dumont?
Margaret Dumont.
Yeah.
And she just breaks out in song, and he sings. But it just, where did this come from?
This was not the first time they did this in the second movie is Animal Crackers, I believe, and the same thing. And that was part of their upbringing. They came from the Borscht Belt on not Broadway, but the vaudeville. And so singing was part of the Marx Brothers thing. So this was not crazy, and dancing was part of their world too.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Oh, it's crazy.
You all sang, you all danced, and you all played a musical instrument. And if you didn't do all of those things, you weren't a 5-tool player, and you didn't get work.
Correct. Right. And they did it all. So this movie, it features all four of them, the four main Marx Brothers. Although Zeppo, he ultimately leaves the cast and gets out of filmmaking. So it's Groucho, Harpo, and Chico.
He and Gummo became talent managers.
Yep, and you got Margaret Dumont as Mrs. Teasdale, and Lewis Calhern, who's the ambassador to Trentino, who's the bad guy in the film. And you've got Groucho, who's doing the Groucho thing and kind of running the show and going crazy and creating havoc. And all three boys just doing their thing in chaotic fashion. And I think chaos is the word of the day when you talk about the Marx Brothers. They come into any universe that's kind of normal, and they flip it upside down.
They're the original disruptors.
I think you could argue they are the original disruptors for comedy on film. I think you're right. The DNA from the Marx Brothers takes you through the National Lampoon guys in the 70s who just couldn't have enough of the Marx Brothers and their unconventionalism, through Saturday Night Live to the Warner Brothers TV cartoons with Bugs Bunny. There's this connection between them all. I would argue that it's all starts at the Marx Brothers and goes forward.
Well, and if you ever watched MASH, Alan Alda steals Groucho. He's basically doing Groucho the whole time he's on it. I mean, all the one-liners, all the zingers, all the different things that go back and forth. He steals some of the actual lines right from these movies.
Correct. And then the movies themselves, it doesn't really matter what the storyline is about. You're just putting them in a place and let them go.
Yep.
And you could argue that Bill Murray is Groucho-like.
Yeah.
You put him in Ghostbusters, you put him in Stripes, you put him in Meatballs, you put him in Caddyshack, and you let him go, and the chaos ensues. And that's where it's all from the same place, I think, right?
I still got to get back to the lazy writing there, Petey, where Chico is Chicolini. Really? You couldn't come up with another name for him? And you call Harpo Pinky instead of Harpolini? You couldn't just throw a Lini on his name too? At least Groucho wasn't Groucho. He was the ridiculous name, Rufus T.
Yes.
Firefly.
This wasn't their highest grossing film, but it's considered their most important film in a lot of ways, because it takes a look at political conventions and governmental conventions and skewers them to no end, which at the time was a big deal. Some people didn't like that. Why are you getting into politics, and why are you getting into political systems and government and war? This sounds like a political satire, and that wasn't a thing at the time either. And this is always looked upon as like this look at governments and politics and bureaucracy and just tearing them down to the shreds, and how crazy the military is and how crazy governments can be, and the fights between governments, how insane they are. And this is the Marx Brothers, look at all that.
Do you think it was intentional?
I don't think it was intentional, and it just became that at the time that was the landscape. This movie, the landscape was this weird little story between these two fake countries, but it kind of became something else over time, I think. I don't think it was ever the intent.
I think this kind of almost predates a lot of the rise of fascism, which becomes this ridiculous people that are out there. In 33, not a lot was going on. By the end of the 30s, pretty much everything had broken away. And, I think some of it also maybe brought about by the rise of the Bolsheviks. There's a lot of communism, like the one character, Pinky, maybe that's something to do with the Reds and the communists. And there's a little of that undercurrent in there. And I think the military complex, where I think a lot of these countries in Europe that they had come from, their families had come over from Europe.
That's right.
I think they saw a lot of it as like the silliness where someone decides to declare war and they just go, okay, well, sure, why not? There's no point behind it.
Well, the whole thing with that was pretty funny. That whole scene where it just escalates. He's talking to Margaret Dumont and they're talking about a handshake. And what if he refuses to shake my hand?
How dare he?
Oh my God. It was just so funny.
This means war.
He just couldn't get out of his own head.
No.
And then the guy walks in, he's all ready to make amends, and
he just slaps him in the face.
oh my God, it was so funny.
Refuse to shake my hand? How dare you?
Mussolini found the film to be a personal insult, and he was banned in Italy. This is when the rise of that era of dictator, and it looked like a skewering of dictators and those fascist regimes. Yeah. And whether or not they intended it to be that way, it became that way, and it's a political farce. I think a whole level of looking at the film, because on a base level, it's just the Marx Brothers going just insane. Yeah. And that opening scene, trying to get Groucho there to take over run the country, is so funny. Nothing runs right. He's late. The opulence and over the topness of the marching band and everyone in this ballroom,
the ballerinas and the rose petals, everything going on.
All of that era of military look with feathers on the helmets and the epaulets and was that how you say it?
Epaulets
and epaulet, and just way over the top.
And I think to a certain extent it skewers the Busby Berkeley kind of ridiculous musical.
It totally does, yeah.
Of all these things, we have 300,000 people on stage right now. Well, what? Yeah. What's the point of that?
Yes.
But he oversleeps. The alarm goes off. He's got a fire pole. He slides down a fire. He's actually fully dressed underneath his sleeping gown. Everything about it's ridiculous.
My son does that, by the way.
Well, there you go. See, it influences him.
Sleeps in his clothes for the next day.
The youngest? Oh, yeah. He just goes to bed in his shorts and a T-shirt, 10 degrees outside, and he just goes. But
what I think is really funny is that Groucho uses grease paint, and he just puts on a mustache and eyebrows, and no one says anything. This is the guy running the country, and okay, sure, that's not a mustache. That's not even close to a mustache. But nobody cares. We just run with it.
They were famous for breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah,
looking at the audience, talking directly to the people on their side of the camera. It's this different surreal world that they've created on film. I think that's what sucked me in. It wasn't just your standard I Love Lucy sitcom. Yeah. It was very different. It wasn't like anything else. It's all about the writing. MASH is a really great example because it's all those one-liners are really well crafted. They're not just like some guy just kind of faking it. They're really well thought out and how that line is delivered. And then you've got the amazing skill of these characters who know how to deliver a line. I always wonder about these kinds of things and how many takes did it take Groucho to do some of that stuff? Probably one or two.
And for years, they said that, Margaret Dumont didn't understand the jokes. And they said, no, she did understand the jokes. She's playing the straight person. So she can't react like it's a joke. And they said years later, they would be showing like scenes of things at the memorial kind of shows of it's the 30 years since they did the show, whatever. And she'd be laughing louder than anybody. And they were like, wait, you get the joke? She's like, I always got the joke. My job wasn't to laugh. I wasn't supposed to laugh. I was supposed to be the straight person.
Right.
And that's why Groucho always refers to her as the fifth Marx brother. That if it wasn't for her, this stuff wouldn't work. If she was playing it for a laugh, nobody would like it. And instead, she's playing it straight, and she's so good at it. And because she was a classically trained opera singer and classical actor, and it just plays so well with her.
She's so great because she could be insulted in 1 second and then totally enamored with the next line. Her facial expressions, her body, she just changes with whatever Groucho or whoever is talking. Usually Groucho.
On to the next scene, right?
On to the next scene, on to the next line, and she's right there. Yep. She is so great.
I haven't really sat down and watched the whole thing, I don't think, from start to finish until this week. And it's really interesting to watch it, like the set pieces and like the whole thing outside with the lemonade stand and the peanuts, where they're just harassing that poor guy the whole time.
Just the first lemonade stand peanut thing with the hats, where they just go back and forth exchanging hats on each other's heads. And it's at one point, the rather big burly guy is wearing the little Tyrolean hat on his head. It barely fits his head now. He thinks he has his own hat back on, and that's like a classic vaudeville routine, I suppose.
Right.
That they've now transposed to the scene, and it plays so well because they're so involved in it, and no one breaks character, and there's no dialogue,
and it's one take.
It's amazing. It really is amazing.
It's
one take. That's right.
That is all one take.
It's amazing.
and the big musical numbers are really all one take. I don't see any cuts.
No, the physical comedy side of things is really somewhat. We know Harpo that's his thing, right?
Yep.
He is really great at that, but they all are. And that scene specifically, like you said, it's a physical comedy masterpiece. And we get later into this really famous scene of the mirror scene, which is just beyond famous, right? At this point, with Groucho and Chico kind of mirroring each other. Their physical comedy skills are just amazing. And it's probably because of all the years on vaudeville.
Right.
At that time, you had to be doing something on stage to have the audience stick with you.
Yeah, the action doesn't stop. And as you go from town to town to town, the action might be different depending on the audience. Yeah. So you got to be able to improvise. You got to be able to run through different scenarios, and they're just masters at it. It really is amazing.
But the funny thing, with the whole scene with the lemonade guy and all that, does it really bear anything on the story except for maybe it's just a vehicle? Nothing. It has nothing to do with the story, and it might go a little long, but it is really funny, and it's just,
and it's the supercuts between some musical number, some Fredonia Sylvania nonsense, where you can't transition to the next one. So they throw that in there as the amuse-bouche. We're going to throw that in there we're going to separate out the pieces. And they cut 3 times to that, where you look at it and you're like, well, they didn't have any smooth transition to the next scene. So they cut to them, then cut back, then cut to them, and cut back.
Right.
And it doesn't work as a continuous plot device.
Right.
But the individual scenes are tremendous. They really
are. Yeah, absolutely.
You could be pretty critical of this looking at it with a modern eye. The editing is kind of is sketchy, and that whole mirror scene is amazing because there's no sound.
Right.
Aside from their feet hitting the ground, there's no music and there's no sound. There's nothing.
The one thing that I never really noticed is they're brothers. Obviously, they're the Marx brothers, but I never noticed how much they look alike because the brothers were losing their hair, and one was wearing like a reddish wig and one was wearing a blonde wig, and they were ridiculous. And Groucho has the ridiculous painted on mustache and eyebrows. In that scene where they all paint on the mustache and the eyebrows, and they're just wearing the sleeping cap.
They all look alike.
They really do look alike. And they are mirroring each other to the extent where you can't really tell who's Groucho and who's Harpo and who's Chico. And it's really, when he walks through the mirror and comes back around again, to me, that's the best part of the whole thing. That they actually walk through the mirror. And then at the very end, when the third one comes in and messes everything up. But
if you see pictures of them when they're younger, there's definitely a family resemblance.
Yeah, but you don't realize that until that scene. You're like, oh, you guys, you really are brothers. You really look similar enough that in a mirror, you could pass for one another. And with Mrs. Teasdale, she thinks they're all the same guy because, they're wearing the glasses and the painted on mustache. And it's just so really well done.
I don't think when I was a kid, I realized the satire involved of
you're not going to get
war and military and politics. I didn't see it all, and just bureaucracy. But now I haven't seen it for a few years either. And watching it again, it's really great at just tearing down those walls. Whether it's about his trial, Chico's trial, and everyone's out of order, everything is just a joke, and it kind of is in the real world. It's a bunch of people talking heads, and that's what this is about in some ways, is these crazy institutions that get us into these crazy worlds of war and people dying, and it's all nonsense. And that's what these guys do really well at just doing, as exposing it all.
And Chico with his, I'm not sure what that accent is, and they go through, did you sell the code and the plans? Of course I sold the code and 2 sets of plans, 2 pairs of plans. And it goes through the whole the irrelevant elephant thing. It's just so funny because it's twists on language, but it also shows the ridiculousness of the courtroom scene and people adjudicating and all the stuff that goes on, which is just so silly.
I've thought long about this, that it's funny that none of the Marx Brothers movies have ever been really redone. Everything gets redone.
Oh, like a remake?
A remake, right?
I say leave it alone and don't do it.
So, a lot of that stuff you probably wouldn't want to touch nowadays.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's not politically correct. The chasing the skirts throughout every movie, Harpo being Paul Revere and then ending up in this woman's house, which is the wife of the peanut sales guy.
The one scene in that, though, when that happens, they had instituted the Hayes rules where a man and a woman couldn't be in bed together. So you see him take the horse into the house, and it's his shoes and her shoes and the horseshoes, and he's in bed with the horse because he couldn't be in bed with her because that was against the rule. And it was, again, one of these like knocks against authority and just like this smart alecky kind of thing they were doing, it's just really funny. He's in bed with the horse.
Sir, you try my patience. I don't mind if I do. You must come over and try mine sometime.
But they, the one thing in there, which was kind of reminiscent of, his father was a mother. His mother wasn't one of the mother. Loves to slap. Where he says, well, maybe I am a little headstrong, but I come by it honestly. My father was a little headstrong. My mother was a little Armstrong. The Headstrongs married the Armstrongs.
Yeah, but the next line you would never say.
That's where darkies were born. And it becomes one of these things, well, that's a little bit of racism in the movie.
Oh,
that's right. Well, so much of the Groucho-isms in this are just in my brain all the time. And we talked about the Bill Murray movies being things we grew up on. And this is one of those ones for me too. I don't know how many times I've seen it. And every time I see it, I find little things about it that I didn't remember from the first time I saw it or a previous time. It is really good. What it's also funny is because this is the 30s, right? So you're talking about men who were potentially, post Civil War, right? And you see these big beards and these big mustaches. It's a look back in time in a lot of ways. Oh, those guys are just hilarious.
I'll give them 10 years in Leavenworth or 11 years in Swellworth.
Oh, that's so funny.
So funny.
Oh my gosh.
And then the war scene where it starts as a contemporary battle between Fredonia and Sylvania. And then the next scene, he's dressed like it's World War One. And then the next scene, he's dressed like he's part of the U.S. during the Civil War. Then he's a Confederate during the Civil War. Then he's wearing one of the big beefeater hats. I mean, the whole thing was just so silly. At the end, he's got a picture stuck on his head, and they draw his face on the picture. This whole thing it's so ludicrous where you're just like, oh.
It's funny you said that because I was thinking the Marx Brothers are very influential. This movie's influential, and who are influenced by them. And one place I saw an article, which is really interesting, is that the Beatles were really influenced by them. The Beatles' Help is kind of this scatterbrain kind of comedy, and guys run around like nuts, and there's a lot of Marx Brother in that. Another place is the Monkees. Yeah. And you said that the changing of the costumes, the changing of the costumes by Groucho in the war scene, that happened all the time during the Monkees. Quick edits, quick changes of clothing, and by the 60s we're used to it already. But in the 1930s, that was like really strange for a viewing public to see. Yeah. This guy was just in this uniform. Yeah. Now he's in this uniform. Now he looks like a Confederate soldier. What the heck is going on? This is crazy. This had to be out of like another universe for people to be watching in 1933. I can't even imagine what the public thought of this when they were used to like Charlie Chaplin. I think you guys were indulging me. This was fun to revisit. It made me get out the box set of Marx Brother movies to plow through, which I will, because there's other ones that are just as funny and just as crazy.
It's a passion project for you.
It is a passion project for me. Yeah. Yes. I've stolen my favorite lines from these people. How are we doing on this whiskey, kids?
Oh, it's good. I like it.
I had seconds.
So did I.
I must have short poured myself the first time around. So
yeah, I got the bottle and I went in for a second one myself. So yeah, it's very easy. Good. It's good.
Delicious.
Delish.
I think the ABV is about right. I think it was a little higher ABV. It might be too much of a finish. If it was a lower ABV, it might not have enough oomph. At 49%, that's oomph. I like that.
Yes, it is. It's good. It's very good.
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Glazer, for another wonderful little batch of Compass Box for us. Well, boys, another episode of One Show, One Drink down the tubes, and that's our modus operandi. Tonight we did a fun little trek down memory lane, 1930s black and white, the Marx Brothers Duck Soup classic comedy, and Glasgow blend from Compass Box, a private cask for the Southern California Whiskey Club. We've done it again. We have hit the mark. We did it. Another one in the can. Ange, tell these fine folks at home where they can listen to this and all of our podcasts.
Sure, I'll do that. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, Google, and a few others that I can't remember. And lastly, and bestly, is bestly a word?
No.
Not a word?
No, that's not a word.
All right. Anyway, lastly, you can find us on boozdancing.com. And if you have drink, show, cocktail, movie suggestions, whatever, say hi. Tell us your favorite show. Tell us your favorite whiskey. Email us at boozdancing@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Gentlemen, as always, a pleasure, a boozy pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, gents.